Okay, everyone. Well, I want to welcome you to Trailblazing a Path for Women in STEM, a celebration of Women's History Month presented by Redwire. I am Faith Horowitz. I'll be moderating today's discussion, and I want to take a moment to thank our distinguished panelists for participating. And of course, I want to thank and welcome all of our attendees for joining us today to celebrate Women's History Month and to celebrate women in STEM and the aerospace industry. So I'd like to take a minute to introduce myself. I'm Faith Horowitz, the Redwire Chief Administrative Officer. I have over 30 years of business management experience, and in 2007, I founded my own company working primarily in national security. 11 years later, I sold it and had nothing else to do. So I joined with two of my colleagues and we started a new company called Redwire. This is when I began my engagement with aerospace. For those who don't know, Redwire is a new company specializing in space infrastructure technology. Areas we work in include on-orbit servicing, assembly and manufacturing, digital engineered spacecraft, low Earth orbit commercialization, space domain awareness and resiliency, and advanced sensors and components. Redwire is part of some of the most exciting missions happening today, including the Mars 2020 and Ingenuity helicopter, the Solar Cruiser mission, and this summer we will be providing the new solar arrays for the International Space Station. The groundbreaking work that's happening at Redwire is being led by a diverse team of individuals, and in celebration of Women's History Month, this webinar aims to highlight some of the women behind some of this extraordinary work. So you can see those women on the screen right now. I'd like to invite each of the panelists to introduce themselves to you. I'm going to start by asking Alicia Carey to go first, then Suzanne Gillen, Heather Gould, and finally Heather Kuhar. After the introductions, I'm going to ask our panelists a couple of questions and then open questions to you, our audience. You should be able to submit your questions through the Zoom Q&A function, so please feel free to submit them at any time during the discussion, and we will address them at the end. So there you go. Alicia, I would like to introduce you to our audience and ask you to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hello, everybody. I understand that it's going to be a mixture of audience ages, and so I wanted to relay a few points about how I got to where I was starting back in high school. I think I grew up in Houston, so I was always interested in space, and I had the opportunity to do a lot of summer space courses, like Texas Aerospace Scholars. And so that got me really involved with the NASA group. It's very oriented toward education. They gave me a lot of other opportunities to include an internship at NASA my senior year. So it's definitely something that you can get involved in if you're really passionate early on. When I was in the astronaut office during my internship, I was so excited that I just said, how do I make this part of my life? How do I do this? And came by it honestly in a very engineering way. We ran the numbers and said, okay, if you want to be an astronaut or if you want to work with the astronauts, you have to know what they're going through. So you should be a pilot, because at that time, about 50% of the astronauts were pilots for the shuttle program. And to be a pilot, who was the most pilots? The Air Force. So go to the Air Force, become a pilot, and then you'll pop out and be ready to apply for the astronaut corps. So basically, that's what I did. I went to the Air Force Academy, and after 4 years, I got my engineering degree and popped out into the Air Force, learned how to fly C-17, which is a transport and cargo aircraft. That's very exciting to fly. It's kind of like a race car of a plane. And after that, there was a need for a lot of pilots to transition over to the remotely piloted aircraft. So I ended up moving to Las Vegas and learning how to fly the Predator. At that point, my contract was coming up. I had been in the Air Force about 10 years flying, and I said, I've gotten a little bit far away from space. So what steps should I take to go back to that original goal of working in space? And I looked around before taking any actions, and I found a company in Las Vegas called Bigelow Aerospace. And they really gave me a lot of opportunities there. It's sometimes difficult to get a job right out of the military. And this was a really great company that was trying to create the next generation space station. They believed that a cloth-based expandable habitat was the way to go. And so I worked with them for about 2 years and learned how to write technical documents and learned how to run a scheduling department and eventually became a project manager. So all of that set me up for this wonderful job at Redwire Space. I've been a project manager here in the payloads division, gotten promoted to the lead program manager at this point, and I'm currently supervising 6 project managers over 16 different research projects. So we have sent 4 to the space station so far, and we actually have 3 more scheduled this year. So keep your eye in the sky because we're going to be launching something. All right. Thanks. Over to Suzanne.
Thank you, Alicia. And thank you, Faith, for moderating this panel today. And thank you all for joining us today. We're very excited to share this story. And it's exciting to be here with such a great panel of women leaders at Redwire. So I'm Suzanne Gillen. I'm Vice President of Government Relations and Business Development here at Redwire. I actually started here just a few months ago. I grew up in Daytona Beach, Florida, and that's about an hour south of Redwire's headquarters in Jacksonville. And my inspiration for working in the space industry started from watching space shuttle launches as a kid from outside in my elementary schoolyard. That was just up the street from NASA's Kennedy Space Center. So I actually had a dream of becoming an astronaut. And while I'm still dreaming of going to space, and I plan to get there someday, I'm excited to be a part of the space industry at Redwire, and then also in my past jobs that I'm going to talk about in a minute in the government. So I was also interested in the environment, and I studied environmental science and was a minor in chemistry at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C., there are many opportunities for internships. So I took advantage of interning for Congress for my home state senator of Florida. And I did that my senior year. And when I graduated, they had openings and I was able to get hired to stay on their staff. Well, I ended up staying in the Senate for 14 years. And I worked for multiple senators and multiple Senate committees, but it was a really great place to learn about how our government works, but also shape the policy that's shaping the space industry today. So I worked on the Senate Commerce Committee, and I was working for the chairman, and I was their lead space staffer that oversees NASA. And so I worked on key space laws that you may be familiar with, the NASA Authorization Act of 2017 and the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act, CSLCA, of 2015. And so I had an opportunity to really develop and draft and be a part of developing those laws. That was very exciting. So my experience in working in the Senate led me to working at NASA for the previous administrator, Jim Bridenstine, for the past 2 years as head of their congressional affairs, where I focused on building bipartisan support among Republicans and Democrats for securing funding for NASA and the Artemis program, to put the first woman and the next man on the moon. So now, after all that, I'm excited to work at Redwire, and I'm the head of government relations and business development, as I mentioned. And that means I'm advocating for Congress and advocating to Congress and NASA and the defense agencies as well, with building support for funding for programs where on work that Redwire is doing. Great things like our Archinaut and our on-orbit robotic assembly and manufacturing, and much, much more. We're a big partner and enabling a lot of space missions, both in civil space, commercial space, and national security space. So my job is to educate Congress on what we're doing to build support and funding for those programs. So that's everything about how I got here, and thanks for letting me share that story. Now over to Heather.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. My name is Heather Gould. I am the Contracts and Compliance Officer here at Redwire. I have a little over 12 years experience in multiple STEM industries, technically originally from Albuquerque, New Mexico, but now living in Denver, Colorado for the last 3 years. My gateway experience into the STEM industry and consequently where I'm at now is actually from a very different perspective. I really was able to get my start in the aerospace, aviation, and pharmaceutical industry very early on from a sales and marketing perspective. So technically, majority of my background really accumulated there, but consequently was where I was able to actually get the exposure to a lot of the legal frameworks that I'm operating within now. So hence the now spearheading the contracts and compliance program here at Oakman Aerospace with Redwire. Over to you, Heather.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Heather Kuhar. I'm the Vice President of Operations for Redwire's Longmont facility, and I've been in this role for 2 years. And my background, I also represent kind of a non-traditional path into STEM. So I got my Bachelor of Arts in English in Illinois, and my first job out of school was working for an advertising agency and writing copy and creating catalogs. And part of that job was involved creating the inventory of all of the catalogs and that sort of thing. So that was my first spark into materials management. I subsequently moved to Colorado in 1993 and got my very first manufacturing job with Micromotion here in Colorado. And that was where I fell in love with manufacturing and really generated a passion, had my eyes open to all of the different innovations that can happen on the support side. So materials, supply chain, project management, production, continuous improvement, all of these things that we need for bringing innovative technologies into tangible products. So over the last 29 years, I've been developing kind of, progressing year over year, but always in STEM industries, similar to Heather Gould. So about half of my career has been in aerospace startups and helping to provide all of that support structure and create that infrastructure to bring innovation to actualization.
Well, thank you, everyone. Very interesting paths that you've all chosen, some traditional, some less traditional. And so I'm interested in talking to you a little more about that. So let's start with Heather Kuhar. So you started your career in aerospace manufacturing at a time when there weren't really that many women in the field. So did you face many challenges, in that capacity, and how did you deal with them?
Definitely. So that start to my career was in the early 90s. And, definitely it was not the way it had been in the 70s and the 80s when there was just some blatant, sexism in the workplace and so forth. But it was very common to be the only female in the room in a typically, male-oriented environment inside of manufacturing. So, some of the things that I did or recognized and put into play was just finding those mentors and making sure I sought out both male and female mentors. And the female mentors were, a little few and far between, but there were at Micromotion, when I started there were 3 significant female role models. Christy Urquidi was our Vice President of Operations. Marta Christensen was our head of supply chain, and then Gwen Rogers-Smith was our head of production. So it just so happened I was able to, see women in leadership roles in that manufacturing environment. One other thing that I learned early on was to really speak with confidence and prepare and present with confidence. And this seems like a subtle thing, but females in technical roles at times will qualify their ideas and qualify things. Oh, I just have this idea, or, have you considered, and ask in the form of a question, and noting that, the male counterparts that I had wouldn't do those things. So that was one nuance that I conscientiously changed as well. So I think, speaking and acting with confidence and seeking out those mentors early on was definitely helpful in my development.
That's a great answer. Sorry,
yeah, it
Faith.
really is.
I just have to
certainly
say that was
agree.
fantastic. And honestly, speaking with confidence is something that played a role in my career as well.
Well, there you go. Heather Gould, you also had a very diverse resume before you ended up in contracts and compliance. So if you were going to go back and give advice to your younger self as she was starting out in her career, what would you tell her?
Well, honestly, what I would have told myself is, why don't you go ahead and head back to school and pursue your Juris Doctor degree? That was something certainly that I had while I attended school for business, and my minor was environmental science. I always had this issue, but not an issue, so to speak. It was an interest, but I could never really get a lot of motivation or outside encouragement to pursue a degree in law. So I really would have actually told myself before I actually, went out into the career field to go back and explore that option, because clearly that's an avenue and a path that would have taken quite a bit of time and dedication. And I really would have had to have acquired a certain discipline to have carried that through. So I really would have strongly encouraged that and had that conversation. In addition to that, though, I really just would have encouraged myself to right out of the gate of school is start networking, start building those relationships that will be important. Directly out of school, a lot of us, we're all navigating a very new reality for our lives. And while that reality is different for all of us, networking and building rapport with those that are around us that's going to be a crucial tool throughout your entire career and during your life. So I really would have strongly encouraged that as well.
Well, that's very interesting as well. Suzanne, you also had many interests similar to Heather before you ended up in government relations. I don't know if you thought you should have gone into law too, but what advice would you give to young women who are interested in a career in aerospace, but may not become an astronaut, as you obviously did not as well?
I would say if you want to be, dream it and go for it. But three things that I think are really important are, follow your passion, take advantage of internships, and build your relationships and networks. So for finding your passion, as I mentioned, my passion was an environment, and I studied in environmental science, and I, ended up working in the environmental field and environmental policy for a decade in the Senate. But that experience working in the Senate is what gave me the experience to work on a Senate committee in charge of space policy, because they were looking for someone who had Senate experience. So they didn't care that I didn't have space policy experience yet. So they knew that you could learn an issue and you could build your contacts, but you needed to know the congressional process. So I had, and also the staff director of the committee at the time is someone I worked with on environment a decade ago. So that clues into the, build relationships, because I had the right relationships for with that particular position and had experience in some other field that they needed. But it ended up making me be able to work in the space policy area. And so NASA then was interested in me because I had the congressional experience, and the space was good as well, but the congressional experience was important. So I would say follow your passion, and you'll end up where you want to be eventually at some point. And so that's why I still believe I'll be in space at some point. I would say internships. When I was in college in Washington, D.C., so many of my roommates and friends, they were interning everywhere from, you can intern at NASA, you could intern at Redwire, you can intern in the space industry at SpaceX, other companies, but also they interned at the White House. There were so many. It's dream big on where you would dream about, working someday, because internships are an opportunity to get your foot in the door and build that network while you're there. And it gives you a chance to go somewhere early on in your career that you would dream about. So I wish that I'd even thought of interning at NASA back then, but I interned on the Hill instead and eventually got here. But dream big about, opportunities, because many places have internships. Take advantage of them. You can even intern, at different places around the U.S. Doesn't have to be necessarily where you are right now. I know that, you can spend a semester or a summer in Washington, D.C. and intern on the Hill or White House, key places like that. But really, relationship building is key. So as you're taking advantage of the internships or your early jobs, it's really important that you take the time to grab coffee, grab lunches, meet up after work, take the time to meet one-on-one in meetings during the workday, because those relationships and building out your network, everyone's going to be moving around throughout your life and through the decades of your career. And I end up facing that a lot of the people that ended up hiring me were people I knew before, either from previous jobs or previous times in my life. So it's really important to take advantage of that and go to different events and conferences where you can meet even more people. So those are the three things that I think are important.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much, Suzanne. Alicia, you also had a career journey that was different from, or you had a career journey that was different from our other panelists. Did you encounter any challenges or barriers along the way, and how did you overcome them?
Sure, yeah. If you listen to the story, you pretty much heard the theme of constant change. Change from high school to college, that was the military, learning about the military. I grew up with 0 brothers, and so it was a huge culture shock going into a military school where we only had 6% women at the time. Changing aircraft, changing industries, changing. So I would say that that was one of my biggest challenges, is constantly being able to start over. And in a way, it's hugely difficult, obviously, but in a way, it kind of became my superpower, because if you're able to approach something like that really calmly and look at it as an opportunity, um, look at what you need to learn first, get organized so that you're capable as early as possible, that kind of skill is going to help you go wherever you want to go. Just like Suzanne said, people are going to change jobs and they're going to change careers, and they're going to move around their whole lives. And so if you feel comfortable doing that, or at least confident that you can do that, it's going to open up so many doors. So again, I just looked at, okay, what is my goal today? Where do I want to go? Does that require a change? Okay, what do I need to start learning to prepare for that change? Who do I need to start talking to? Is that someone in my network? And just thinking about it in an organized way instead of a scary way. I think that's something that really, really helped me. And if people start practicing, it's very much a learned skill, and they can become good at it and get to where they want to go.
Well, great. Well, Heather Kuhar, did you have any women that you could look to as role models when you entered the manufacturing field? Well, you did mention them, I'm sorry. Well, how do you think the manufacturing field has changed for women entering it today as opposed to when you entered it?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, in the early 90s, it was not uncommon to be the only female in the room. And those few women in leadership positions were really key. What's really remarkable when I think back about it is, Christy Urquidi, Marta Christensen, Gwen Rogers-Smith, in a 300, 400 person company, and I'm entering in as this, fresh out of college, 22-year-old person. Every single one of them made space for me, which I think was pretty remarkable as I reflect on that now. And I do think that the field is changing. I think, based on the interactions here in Colorado, especially throughout, the manufacturing network, we've all interacted very closely. And this past year, uniting just on the COVID front and pivoting. And a lot of those conversations these days are being led by women, panels and webinars and networking events. It's much more common these days to see a female presence, and I'm speaking specifically to Colorado manufacturing, but I hope that's the case more broadly as well. One of the things I did want to mention, that environment in the 90s was, I alluded to it not being quite so obvious, if you will, as it was in the 70s and 80s when there were literal barriers for women in certain fields. What I experienced, I would call more of kind of an unconscious assumption about myself and my growth as a female. So once I had this realization, and I think it's important for us to kind of just be aware, there were just some assumptions made that I would not necessarily be interested in leadership or not necessarily interested in traveling. And I think some of those unconscious perceptions and unconscious biases were very subtle, during that time. And we're having this conversation today in honor of, Women's History Month. And it's great. And I'm excited for us to, continue this conversation. And I definitely look forward to the day when it's not a conversation at the same time, right? Where all of these opportunities in technical fields and innovative fields are open to all talent, regardless of demographic. So I do see some change happening. And I think, part of the role that we can play as we advance in our careers is definitely making those connections, being present like we're being present today, and trying to, provide support for folks that are coming up in their careers.
Oh, great. Well, thank you, Heather. Heather Gould, so your career isn't as storied or as long as perhaps mine or even Heather's has been. But as you look back at your career so far, what have some of your biggest accomplishments been? What are the things that you look back at and you're proudest of?
Certainly. And there's really so many to list. My ego wants to mention a few, and especially, given the platform that I'm speaking on. But I'm actually going to, I did take a little bit of time to think about this, and I'm going to speak to something that I think is also really, really crucial to the students and the early career professionals that are on the call today. One of what I would consider one of my biggest accomplishments that has really been a game changer for me, especially in my career in contracts and compliance, is that without a significant amount of regulatory research experience outside of general undergrad studies and researching professional interests, I've developed a very strong set of core competencies that have really proven critical in my research and my ability to analyze and interpret complex regulatory requirements and laws. So really having that understanding and forming the skill set that truly was acquired and is a continuous learning skill set required for my job has helped me navigate some of our most heavily regulated industries, and really gave me the opportunity, and this is why I consider this such an accomplishment, because prior to really diving deep into the sea of regulation, regulatory research and having a strong reading comprehension is crucial to understanding these frameworks, understanding the statutes from start to finish. And that includes the process for rulemaking. A lot of folks don't understand the way or the reasons, the why statutes are written a certain way, or that process for that rulemaking as well. So, getting into the compliance portion of this understanding, of course, having the understanding of how to do regulatory research that wasn't just undergrad assignments or just general studies, also has allowed me to, completely understand enforcement and compliance requirements, and then be able to also then interpret those laws to my counterparts and folks that I've worked for. I'm sure Suzanne will agree with me. When it comes to rulemaking and laws, I mean, there's just pages and pages and pages of regulations, and when we're looking for those, those few things, there's a lot of core competencies that are required to be able to pull that data out. That's going to be crucial to whatever tool or innovation or technology that you're working on, or your specific sector in your industry. So really being able to pull that data out and then interpret it, explain it, in a clear and concise and easy way is really what I consider to be one of my biggest accomplishments, and something that I feel has also only helped me in navigating contracts as well.
Well, we've definitely appreciated it, believe me, at our headquarters. Let's see, another question I had. This one's for Suzanne. Suzanne, you've benefited from establishing and maintaining relationships throughout your career. That's definitely been your message. Do you have any advice for young women looking for mentors in the STEM community today? So obviously, your career path has really depended on that. But what if they don't necessarily end up on the hill? Are there other places they can turn as well?
Yes. I would set your sights broad, like follow your passion. Like I was saying, when people think about working in the STEM industry or STEM career, they immediately think NASA or somewhere like SpaceX or something. But just know that while working at NASA is awesome, and I totally encourage it if you want to do that, that you don't have to just do that. There's many great companies like Redwire, for example, that are doing great work with NASA and doing great things in national security or civil or commercial space. And so think about possibly working for one of those companies. They're doing great things, working on innovative and cool technologies. So, you don't just have to go to NASA. You can be an engineer and work at or work on manufacturing at one of these cool, innovative companies. So another thing I wanted to mention is, when it comes to, getting advice on your career path, don't be afraid to reach out to people. Usually, even in people in higher positions, most people will say yes, and they're happy to talk to you. They'll want to give advice because they've been in that place before where you are now. Everyone started somewhere. I started somewhere. And many times I've asked for advice as well from everyone who'd had a career in space before. So get advice from people but also talk with people in your networks, your schools, clubs that you're part of, family, friends. LinkedIn is actually a great website to join because it's a great community for connecting with people in the career that's career focused. You can look up your contacts, but then see who they're connected to, and at jobs where you're interested in working, see what contacts you have that know people that work there and ask them to introduce them to you or just reach out to them. It's okay to also send cold emails to people you don't know over LinkedIn or through trying to get connected through other people. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten an email from someone I know who has connected me with someone who is in college or just recently graduated that was looking for career advice or to talk about careers in Congress or NASA. So that is very common. It happens all the time, but don't feel you can't reach out. Feel free to even email me. Happy to be there for you and provide some advice. But that's the thing is don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to reach out. And people want to mentor. People want to give you advice, and they've been there where you are before.
Well, thank you, Suzanne. And I think that's especially true of those of us who have, come up from the ranks. And when there weren't that many women around, we're excited to see a younger generation of women joining us. So we definitely want to reach out and help, a helping hand. Last of all, I think this will be our last question, then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. Alicia, the theme of the 2021 International Women's Day was Choose to Challenge. And so what does this phrase mean to you as you think about your career and your outlook?
Yeah, thanks, Faith. The first thing I think when we think of challenging, it's always external, like challenge the man, challenge whoever. But really, I found most of the change that happened in my life and my career was when I challenged my own assumptions. So I've had the ability to reach out and ask a lot of questions. Part of that was because I was constantly in a new position. And so everybody in the space community has tended to be really, really helpful and answer a lot of questions. And I found that really I was bounded by a lot of assumptions that I was making about myself and about the position. So I learned a lot when I said, okay, well, I'm entering into this new position. What do I think this new position is? What do I think it means? And then as I learn, I constantly ask questions. Is that still the right definition? Because when you first start something, you have a certain set of eyes, and then as you gain experience, it changes. And so you have to grow your understanding of that position and your capability as you gain experience. I've had the opportunity in a growing company of Redwire to add on different types of responsibilities that I enjoy. I was purely focused on project management for a long time, but now you might see Austin up there on the screen. I've worked with comms a little bit. I get to do panels like this. I've started working with customers and just started looking around. What do I enjoy? How can I incorporate that? How can I change even within my current job? So it doesn't necessarily have to be a big change, but think about what you've artificially put in place and see if that's still true, and see if you have the opportunity to make small changes so that you're happier or that you get greater education, greater experience. So I would absolutely say, look at the assumptions that you're making periodically and make sure that they're still true. And if they're not, then don't let them be your limits.
Well, that's a wonderful way to sum up the International Women's Day theme. Thank you very much. So right now we've got a few questions that have been submitted, and so I'm going to go ahead and pose them to our panelists here. And so I'm going to throw out the question, and if anyone in particular wants to answer it, I'm going to let you speak up. Otherwise, I'll just start soft. I'll volley it over to you. So our first question is, what are suggestions you would give to parents who want to introduce their young daughters to STEM? Okay, how about, I know Heather, you're the mother of 2 children yourself, Heather Kuhar. Do you have any suggestions that you could give? I think you're on mute.
Classic 2020.
There you go.
Yes, absolutely. So I think I would recommend just starting locally. Contact your local schools and branch out to the local school district. And really explore. There's a lot of programs that the schools are engaging with. There's a huge emphasis in the school system on STEM. And I know that I've discovered and learned just in reaching out to those resources and really exploring them. There's like the FIRST robotics programs. A lot of schools will sponsor teams, and they do it for all ages and all grades, I think starting even in preschool, kindergarten. So I would start with the schools and explore all that they offer. I think libraries are also a great resource. Local universities are a tremendous resource. So exposure. Seek out your children's museums. There's usually lots of fun, tangible things that kids can go and play with. So those are some of my recommendations.
And if I could add, real quickly, just be yourself and get interested in showing them books and get a telescope, bring them out there and look at the moon and the stars. I can't tell you how excited I was when my niece, who was 2 years old at the time, she's riding in the back seat and she looks out the moonroof and she's like, Papa, the moon, I want to go to the moon. And I was shocked because she's 2 years old. She's interested just from hearing us talk about it. I mean, I guess I was working at NASA, but I talked about it a lot, and we always got her excited about looking at the stars and looking out, using a telescope, and from there we're even doing more. So she was an astronaut for Halloween. So just doing even your basic things, when they're hearing about it, they're absorbing that, and then they get excited about it.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to my parents. They were always doing home improvement projects, which doesn't really sound like STEM, but it's very much engineering. And so they would always get me involved and just kind of talk through like how they made decisions about how they built something. We built gazebos, we installed sprinklers in the backyard, we put in patios, and it was just like understanding the mentality of, here's how I organize a project, here's how I understand my costs, and literally here's how I'm going to build it. And so just that exposure to engineering, even in a very normal level, made it seem like a way of life and got me interested in building things like airplanes and payloads.
Heather Gould, did you want to add to that at all, or?
I did. One of the other recommendations that I would make, also being a mother, is that there's a lot of different pathway organizations for science and technology. I do know personally there's a couple of resources here at many of the libraries in Denver, but online, just even Googling a couple of different organizations, they'll typically have a lot of their STEM related programs sorted by state or sometimes even the city, depending on how robust your location is. But I know personally that myself and my 2 daughters have taken advantage of a couple of different programs that were offered through a couple of those pathway websites. And some of them, while they do seem a little sponsored, they do provide a great deal of information, as well as what type of age range you're going to want to be looking for, because I do believe that's crucial. Having a 10-year-old and a 17-year-old, they're not necessarily both interested in the same types of things. So knowing what demographic you're looking at for that, activity or that subject is really important. And then also just looking at engagement opportunities at some of the local schools. I know that same thing here in Denver. both at a elementary school level and at my daughter's charter school. They've got a lot of opportunities directly through the community there at their school.
Well, great. I think those were excellent advice. Let's see, another question. Can you address how you have worked through the unique challenges women face building families and a career? So again, we have a couple of working mothers, so I'm going to let them start off with the answers.
Yeah,
which Heather would like to go first?
Yeah, this is a big deal. You may have heard the statistic. I think it was 3.9 million women in the United States left the workforce due to COVID-19 because of responsibilities for childcare and home support of online learning. So it's a great thing to be thinking about. One of the things that was most difficult for me and also most crucial for me. So we mentioned I've got 2 children, but I'm also a single mom. And relying on your network and asking for help. Like I said, it's not easy to do that because we should be able to do it all, right? But just recognize and create communities around you where you guys can do ride shares, or you can do help with daycare. There are definitely challenges to work through, but don't settle, don't compromise. And really try to seek out those resources that you can rely on to support you. It's never a good time, so don't wait either. It's never a good time to start a family. If you're planning for that good time, it's never a good time. Just do it.
Heather Gould?
Certainly. A lot like Heather, very similar circumstances there. One of the things, I think that as a single mother, no matter the situation, you're going to expect to have certain hurdles. There's going to be that balancing act that really there's an ebb and a flow that's constantly going to change as you advance in your career. So really defining some of those pain points really was what was most crucial to myself. And then going back and assessing, some of the assumptions, even like Alicia was stating in regards to her, career, I had some of those same assumptions in balancing motherhood and my career. So, having a check-in every now and again with myself was really, really important, and as well with my children and my coworkers in my company. The other thing that I would really point out, though, that has been the most crucial in navigating these challenges is working for a great team. When you've got a good support system with you, not only with your friends and your family outside of the career force and the workforce, having folks that work with you in your organization to also help balance that and understand some of the challenges that you're facing, I think have been the most crucial and getting me to the point where I feel there is a healthy balance and I am actually able to take care of all of the things and all my commitments satisfactory, if not, even better than that. So I would really encourage, reaching out to folks that, organizational wise, if you're looking to start a career somewhere, really understanding their culture and getting a feel for how they navigate these things as well.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much, Heather. I'm going to ask another question now that's come in. What are some of the critical skills that you feel women need to master to prepare for a career in aerospace? And of course, we've presented some very diverse views of how your career in aerospace can happen. Would any of you like to volunteer? Are there some common skills, some common critical skills that you think, we've brought to the front in this conversation?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Obviously, we have a range of careers represented here in aerospace. So you don't necessarily have to be an engineer when you think about aerospace. But my opinion, the most important skill that you can practice is critical thinking. When you look at aerospace, it's one of the most dynamic, innovative careers that you can be in. And so they're constantly looking for, how do we optimize performance? How do we squeeze every last penny out of this contract? How do we think of a new way of creating this material? So there's a common thread there, which is creativity and critical thinking. You're constantly analyzing, how can we improve? How can we do things better? And if you're good at that, you're going to be able to apply it in an area that you're interested in.
Any other thoughts on that?
Well, from my experience, I think what's what's really important, really in anything you do, is, again, like I said, the relationships. Because in my daily job, it's key to building industry partnerships. It's important to building our relationships with the customer and government agencies, and with working on educating and advocating on the Hill. Like, having those relationships makes my job easier every day, because I need to get information to them, or get intel from them, or things like that. But also, it's important to be able to work as a team, but also be able to work independently. Also, to be able to multitask. Sometimes you'll be working on one thing, like today. I probably was doing 10 different things the last few hours. And it's important to be able to juggle and multitask to be able to get all of the work done. And also, communications is key. Being able to ask the right questions, get the information that you need, but also sharing regularly with your coworkers and teammates, or the people that you're working with externally. Communications is key. So having all those type of skill sets is important. So.
I see a lot of heads nodding here. So I think we all agree with both Alicia and Suzanne's responses. Let's see, here's another question. This is again for anyone on the panel here. What do you see are the biggest hurdles that incoming professionals in STEM or space technology face in building inclusive work environments? Let's see, who wants to jump into that? Heather, Kuhar, I know that you've been very focused in this area recently. Do you want to discuss some of your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, some of the biggest hurdles revolve around, unconscious bias and just lack of awareness and lack of intention in creating inclusive work environments. So I know definitely at Redwire, we are actively having this conversation. We want to have, the most talented individuals that we can have working here and solving problems and creating technologies. And we want to make sure that we are not unconsciously, limiting that environment. So I think the intention and the awareness is a very important hurdle, and it's a very invisible hurdle, if you will. So I think having those active conversations is a method for starting to break down that hurdle and conscientiously creating interactions with, we have a lot of initiatives around supporting coaching, like, Lego, I mentioned the robotics leagues, but at universities participating, for example, like here at CU with the RocketSat program, supporting, capstone projects. We're actively involved, seeking organizations inside of the local universities that are focused on those diverse populations, and just going and being present and presenting and coaching and those types of things. So I think those are some of the initiatives. And then we are very fortunate now to have, members in leadership that are actively having this conversation. I think since the very, very beginning, my interactions with Faith have included diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And here at Redwire, in the process of looking for someone to lead the diversity, equity, and inclusion function of the company or aspect of the company. But it's not just going to reside in a department or an individual. It really has to exist among all of the leadership and among at all levels. Really, we have to be aware of being inclusive. It's one of our core values. As a matter of fact, one of Redwire's core values is inclusivity. We feel that we will be stronger if we can get the efforts of everyone to be valued and to contribute to the overall results that we seek. So absolutely, Heather, you're correct. And we're just looking forward to strengthening our inclusivity at Redwire as well.
Variation on a theme too, from Suzanne's point, point about relationships. It's very important just to get, be present with various different organizations who are also special interest groups, So all about relationships and providing those opportunities.
Yeah,
Thanks,
actually, I have a little anecdote
yeah.
from when I first started at the company. Because I had been in the military and been a pilot and been in other engineering companies where women weren't necessarily represented very highly. I mean, not poorly, they just weren't a lot of them. When I started at Maiden Space Redwire and there were no technical women, it didn't really affect me. And so I was really surprised when we hired our second technical woman. She was a scientist. And she said, you know, I wouldn't have accepted this job if you weren't here, because I would be really nervous that in a male only environment that they wouldn't take me seriously, or I would have these other negative responses from them. But you know, you being here makes me feel like I have a partner. So it really opened my eyes, because to be a role model in that way, to be the first of your gender or your race in an organization is a really powerful thing. And so I think it's a barrier for some people not to be represented. And I really want to empower everybody who's listening to go out and be that representative. Because when I entered the company, I had none of those negative things happen to me. It was a wonderful environment. But I was glad that I could be that bridge to bring on a new, very talented woman onto the workforce.
Well, thank you. Anyone else want to add to that? If
Faith?
not, oh yeah.
The only thing that I would add that I feel is very important, because I was a part of our culture development here on our team, is that, you know, when you're coming into the workforce as an incoming professional, be an active participant. Especially as a woman, you know, we want to be represented and you want to be heard. So, you know, without having that participation factor involved, then you're kind of taking a backseat approach to things, and truly, you know, we won't see the inclusive work environments that we're all trying to develop occur or be accomplished unless your voice is heard.
Well, great. Well, absolutely. And I'm getting the signal now that I should go ahead and wrap this up. So I want to thank my panelists again and our audience. They've been wonderful. I appreciate the questions, and it was great to see so many people participating. And, you know, just to wrap it up, we like to say at Redwire that space is a team sport, and that individuals from all backgrounds and skill sets are needed to make Redwire successful. Obviously, as we said in the last question, you know, we tried to really emphasize that. Today's panel has presented you a diverse group of trailblazing women, and we've described many different routes that they took to get to where they are today. So we hope you'll take away from this both the spirit of inclusion that we've provided to you, and inspired and inspiration to help this next generation of women leaders to rise up in aerospace and accomplish great things as well. So thank you very much on behalf of Redwire, on behalf of the panelists. We want to thank you and bid you have a good afternoon.